Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into the world of Tower Defense Simulator, where mobile units can make all the difference in your strategy. These units aren't just for show, they're the key to conquering those tough enemy towers and pushing forward. We're going to break down the absolute best units for each spawn tower, so you can level up your game and take down your opponents with ease. We'll be covering their strengths, their weaknesses, and everything you need to know to make sure you're using them to their full potential. Now, I know some of these units might seem a little tricky at first, but trust me, once you see how they work in action, you'll be ready to dominate the battlefield. We'll highlight the ones that shine, talk about which ones might need a little more attention, and give you the full rundown so you're not left guessing when it's time to choose your team. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it. I'm quickly moving on to the video, and I'm ranking units in Tower Defense Simulator. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of tier list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching.
A very small portion of the audience is subscribed to the channel. Please don't forget to subscribe if you like these types of videos. Thanks.
The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Rifleman, Guardian Elf, Mark II, Giant Skeleton, Humvee 2, Sentry, and Golden Pistol Goon. Alright, so you've made it past the initial waves in Tower Defense Simulator, but now you're at that point where you need to be smart with your money. You want solid defense, but you don't want to break the bank just yet. Well, that's where C tier units come in. They might not be the flashy top tier units that everyone raves about, but they're your trusty early game allies. Let's dive into why these units are actually super useful and how they can help you hold the line without draining your Robux. First up, we've got the Rifleman from the Mercenary base. This little guy is a solid pick for your early defense. He spawns quickly and covers a large area with decent DPS, which is perfect for mowing down those early waves. However, the downside is that he has the lowest HP of all the mercenaries, so you'll need to keep an eye on him to prevent him from being overrun. Plus, he doesn't have hidden or flying detection, so he might struggle with some special enemies. Still, he's a great budget choice for getting your defense up and running. Next, there's the Guardian Elf from the Elf Camp. This one's fantastic against slower enemies or those pesky hidden units with low HP. You'll find this little elf really helpful when dealing with tricky enemy types. However, keep in mind that when it comes to faster enemies, this elf can struggle to keep up. But if you're fighting at a slower pace or need some extra hidden detection, the Guardian Elf does the job well without costing too much. Then we have the Mark II. The from the Mecha base. If you're dealing with hidden enemies early on, this unit is your go-to. It's especially effective at dealing with those sneaky units that you might miss with other towers. The downside here is that it has a slow fire rate and limited range, and sadly, you can't buff its stats. But if you're facing hidden foes, the Mark II will serve you well, and its full collision damage makes it an excellent pick for tight situations. The Giant Skeleton from the Necromancer is another great pick, especially for handling hordes of low HP enemies. Its full collision damage makes it a reliable choice for crowd control in the early game. However, you'll want to watch out for the Fallen King. If he stomps, that Giant Skeleton is done for. Still, in the right scenario, this unit can clear out a lot of enemies quickly and save your towers from being overwhelmed. Finally, we've got the Humvee 2 from the military base. This unit's perfect for those high health enemies that start appearing early on. It's tough and can take a few hits while dealing out full collision damage, which is fantastic for taking down bigger threats. However, much like some of the other units we've talked about, the Humvee 2 isn't exactly tanky in terms of HP, so you'll need to keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't get overwhelmed too quickly. And that's the scoop on these C tier units. While they might not be the stars of the show, they're definitely reliable early game choices that can help you keep things under control without draining your Robux. They're budget friendly, effective in their own ways, and can really make a difference when used at the right time. So, if you're just starting out or trying to get through the early waves efficiently, don't sleep on these units. They're the unsung heroes of the early game. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Grenadier, Gunner Elf, Cannoneer Elf, Mark III, Skeleton Knight, Humvee 3, Rifle Sentry, and Golden Tommy Goon. Alright, let's get into the fun stuff. If you've been grinding through Tower Defense Simulator and are finally starting to hit that mid-game phase, you're probably wondering which units are going to help you keep that momentum going. Well, don't worry, because today we're diving into the B tier units. These are the ones that aren't exactly the showstoppers, but they're reliable and have just the utility you need to crush the mid game and push into those harder levels. First up, we've got Grenadier from the mercenary base. Now, this guy is super handy when you're dealing with those pesky defense enemies. The Grenadier can deal full damage to them, which is a huge plus. If you've got damage buffs running, you'll definitely see this guy's potential. The downside? Well, he doesn't have hidden detection, so make sure you've got some other units handling those sneaky enemies. But all in all, a solid pick for dealing with a specific type of enemy in the mid-game. Next, let's talk about Gunner Elf from the Elf camp. This unit is fantastic when you hit that mid to late game, thanks to its impressive range and DPS. It's a solid damage dealer that can help you clear waves quickly. However, it's a glass cannon with low HP, so you'll want to keep it protected. Keep it in the backlines and let it rain down fire on the enemies, but don't forget that it can be easily wiped out if you're not careful. And then we have the Cannoneer Elf, also from the Elf camp. Very similar to the Gunner Elf, but with a little more of an explosive twist. High range, high DPS, this unit can really make a dent in enemy waves. But once again, low HP is a problem, so positioning is key. It's especially great for mid-game, but keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't get overwhelmed. Now, if you're dealing with hidden enemies, you can't go wrong with Mark III from the mecha base. This unit is fantastic at detecting and dealing with those sneaky, hidden enemies. On top of that, it deals full collision damage, meaning it's really effective against large waves of enemies. The downside, its fire rate and range can't be buffed, so it's kind of stuck in its ways. Still, a must-have if hidden enemies are giving you trouble. If you're dealing with slow-moving, high-health enemies, then Skeleton Knight from the Necromancer base is your go-to. This unit can dish out a ton of damage with its sword and is great at taking down those tanky enemies that take forever to go down. But just like the others, it has low HP, so it's best used strategically to avoid it getting overwhelmed before it can do its job. Lastly, let's give a shout out to Humvee 3 from the military base. This one's great for dealing with high health enemies that show up early on. It's also got hidden detection, which makes it useful for clearing out those sneaky foes. However, it doesn't get any buffs, so it's not going to get any stronger as you progress. Still, it's reliable for early game hidden enemies and high health units, making it a valuable asset in the mid game. So, there you have it. These B tier units might not steal the spotlight, but they're definitely worth considering as you push through the mid game. Each one has its own unique strengths, and when used correctly, they can be the difference between success and failure as you gear up for the more difficult challenges ahead. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Field Medic, Gift Bomber, Mark IV, Hallow Guard, Tank, Minigun Sentry, and Golden Bodyguard. Alright folks, buckle up. We're diving into some of the most reliable and strategic units in Tower Defense Simulator. These units might not be the flashiest or the strongest, but they absolutely get the job done. You'll want these guys on your team when the going gets tough, because they're A tier for a reason. Let's take a closer look at these highly effective units and see what makes them so great. First up, we've got the Field Medic from the mercenary base. This little guy is a lifesaver when it comes to healing your units. He's the one you'll want around when your squad is taking a beating, as he can keep your guys in fighting shape, preventing them from getting damaged. The only downside, he can only heal humanoid units, so don't expect him to work his magic on those non-humanoid enemies. Still, for what he does, he's an absolute must-have. Next, let's talk about the Gift Bomber from the Elf camp. This unit is a real sneaky one because it can fly over enemy lines without a hitch. It's fantastic for dealing with enemies in tough spots, and its splash damage will make sure no enemy gets away unscathed. The catch? This guy's got pretty low HP, so you'll need to keep an eye on him or he might not last long. But when he works wonders. If you're looking for some heavy firepower, the Mark IV from the mecha base should be on your radar. This one's got high DPS and can spot hidden enemies, super helpful in those late game rounds when things are getting intense. It can also dish out full collision damage, taking down those pesky enemies with defense. However, it's not perfect. It can't buff fire rate or range, so while it's amazing at what it does, it's a bit of a one-trick pony. Then there's the Hallow Guard from the Necromancer base. This unit has one thing going for it: high health. That makes it a beast at surviving most of the big enemy abilities that would wipe out other units. It also deals full collision damage, which is handy for clearing out enemies quickly. The downside, it's weak against Breaker 2 and Breaker 4, so keep that in mind when you're strategizing your defense. Now, for something a bit tougher, we've got the tank from the military base. This one is a tank in every sense of the word. It can't be stunned, making it perfect for those enemies that love to mess with your unit's abilities. Plus, it has hidden detection, which is a big deal for finding those sneaky enemies trying to slip by. The only hiccup? It can't detect flying enemies, so you'll need other units to cover that gap. Last but definitely not least, we have the minigun sentry from the engineer base. This unit is your go-to for high health hidden enemies. Its shield makes it invincible to damage, and it's super effective at dealing with tough enemies that might have snuck past your other defenses. Unfortunately, it can't be buffed, but that's just a small price to pay for what it brings to the table. And there you have it. These A-tier units are absolute powerhouses in their own right, each bringing something unique to the table. Whether it's healing, flying, heavy firepower, or tanking damage, you can't go wrong with any of these guys. They might not be the flashiest, but trust me, they're the ones you want on your side when the stakes are high. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Riot Guard, Ripped Elf, Mark 5, Executioner Skeleton, Railgun Tank, and War Machine Sentry. Alright, let's talk about some absolute beasts in Tower Defense Simulator, the S tier units that can make all the difference when you're ready to crush those late game bosses. These are the ones you'll want to have fully upgraded, taking down the toughest waves with style. Let's jump straight into it and see what makes these units so special. First up, we have the Riot Guard from the Mercenary base. Now, if you're facing a swarm of enemies, this guy's your go-to. His ability to mow down hordes is insane, and on top of that, he deals full damage to enemies with defense, making him a must-have in your late game lineup. But here's the catch, he only gets one upgrade, so you'll want to make sure he's placed in the right spot for maximum impact. Don't let that stop you from bringing him in though, he still gets the job done. Then we've got the Ripped Elf from the Elf camp. This unit is pretty much the definition of splash damage. Need to deal with a group of enemies? The Ripped Elf can handle it. Plus, if there's something hiding in the shadows, no worries, he's got hidden enemy detection. But don't expect any buffs to help him out. This elf is strong on his own, and he doesn't need any extra power-ups to keep fighting. Next, let's talk about the Mark 5 from the Mecha base. If you like high DPS, then you'll love this robot. The Mark 5 comes in swinging with its rocket launcher and the ability to take down enemies like it's nothing. Oh, and it can detect hidden enemies too. Sounds pretty sweet, right? But, just like the Ripped Elf, this unit doesn't get any boosts. What you see is what you get. And honestly, that's plenty. Moving on, we've got the Executioner Skeleton from the Necromancer base. This one's all about taking down those tanky enemies. With its high damage axe throws, it can clear out multiple enemies in a single swing. The real kicker, it can go through an entire line of enemies, making it perfect for tight spots. Just be careful with the Void Reaver's Void Stomp. It's one of the few things this skeleton struggles with. Still, when it comes to raw damage, this guy's hard to beat. Now, who could forget the Railgun Tank from the military base? If you're staring down major bosses, you need this tank in your arsenal. Not only can it fire a cannon that targets hidden enemies, but it's also immune to being stunned, which is a huge advantage when things get hectic. The only downside? It can't deal with flying enemies, so you'll want to pair it with some other units that specialize in air support. But don't let that hold you back, this tank packs a serious punch. Last but not least, we've got the War Machine Sentry from the Engineer. This one's got a shield that makes it nearly invincible to damage, which is perfect when you're going up against tough enemies like the Fallen Titan or Summoner Boss. Plus, those missiles can deal damage to lead enemies, giving you that extra edge. However, the War Machine Sentry does have low HP, so while it's incredibly tough, you'll want to make sure it's well protected. And there you have it, some of the strongest units in Tower Defense Simulator. If you want to take down those final bosses in style, these are the ones you need. They all bring something unique to the table, so mix and match them to create the ultimate defense strategy. Happy defending. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.